Hey YouTube, here's Heiko. Today again in my office, not in my garage. It's time for another computer related video. I decided to upgrade my just recently put together computer. Today I want to do a side-by-side performance comparison between a Ryzen 5 3500 and a Ryzen 5 3600. They are very similar in a way, but yet so different. We're going to do some benchmarking. Physically they are identical, the pins are identical, the socket is identical. We're going to look at the specs, and then we're going to figure out if the upgrade from a 3500 to a 3600 actually even makes sense, or you should get up go up a couple more steps. Let's get started. So I decided to do 3 benchmarks. We're not running any profile, enhancing anything. We don't have Afterburner or Ryzen Master or any of those things running at the moment. So everything is stock setting. No BIOS or UEFI settings have been changed to enhance anything. It's all on auto. So that's how it's going to be running with both of those CPUs. So let's start with the Ryzen 5 3500 Cinebench. Let's start with a multi-core. So multi-score is completed. As you can see here in the bar graph, I've run this before and I actually got 6,886 points, and I think I was running some sort of overclocking profile, maybe in CTR. Right now at everything in stock, nothing is overclocked, no graphics card overclock. no CPU, no RAM overclocking. I'm at 5441. Now we're going to do the single core. Alright guys, so a single core is also completed. As you see, my last time that I ran it, I had about a 1200. Now we're at 1060. So this is the difference that you can cause by just slightly overclocking using the full potential. But later we will see the difference between the 3500 and the 3600 is also in the quality of the dies that are used for the CPU core. So when a CPU is more capable to be overclocked, that means, or it's stable at higher overclocked frequencies, that means that the quality of the cut die is higher than a CPU that will crash or will cause your computer to crash. So there is a nice tool called CTR, which I have installed on here. Where is the link? CTR. Let's see, we can find it. There you go. CTR 2.0 that actually analyzes or gets information from your CPU at how the factory actually rated the cores, the quality of the cores. Is it running background? Oh yeah, here we go. So when you go to the tuner, it will give you a number here next to each core: 124, 128, 128, 121, 114, 117. This is pretty much the factory rating of each CPU core. And the higher quality, this one here, when I run the full diagnostic, it gives it a bronze rating. If you win in the CPU lottery, you might get one that has a much higher rating from the factory, and then most likely the CPU is going to be capable of running higher CPU frequencies. So that is a good tool to have. I might make a video about it, but there are already tutorials out there, so I'm not the first one. So we're going to run the next benchmark, Superposition benchmark. This is a couple years old. 1080p DirectX, and we're just going to leave it all at standard, and we're going to run it right now. Alright, 8658. There is a way of comparing results to other users of the same benchmark, but we're just going to compare it to the new CPU. That's the main objective here. So guys, now we're going to run the last benchmark, 3D Mark times Y. Alright guys, so now we have run 3 benchmarks. The 3D Mark score came back as about 4089, graphics score 3937, and the CPU score, which is probably going to be mostly affected by this CPU change, is 5235. So now we're going to do a little bit of some swapping around and some fresh thermal paste, and then we're going to run this whole thing one more time.
Alright guys, a short section here with voiceover. We had too much background noise in the house, I managed to install the Ryzen 5 3600, put some new thermal paste on there, and now we're going to go into CTR real quick just to take a look at the ratings of the cores that the factory has given them. Earlier we saw the numbers of my Ryzen 5 3500. Now here the 6 cores have 127, 130, 130, 116, 120, and 123. Looks like I again didn't win the CPU lottery, but CTR, the tool itself, gives the CPU a rating, bronze, silver, gold. We'll see what it comes up with once I run a full diagnostic. And now we're going to jump right back into the benchmarks, Cinebench Superposition, and 3D Mark Time Spy.
Alright guys, multi-core test completed. We made quite a jump from 5,441 to 8,305. That's multi-core. That was to be expected since we have the double amount of threads to run this. Now we're going to run the single core comparison. That should be about the same because the base clock and the turbo clock is both the same for the 35 and 3600, but let's see. Well, so we ran the single core and we dropped off a little bit. So from the last run with the old CPU, it was 1060. We dropped down to 974. Yeah, single core. You don't know which core they used. Maybe they used the weakest one. Anyway, so watching Cinebench single core is as exciting as watching paint dry, that's for sure. So now we're gonna get ready and run the next one. Alright guys, now we're gonna run Superposition benchmark. I'm not expecting a massive performance increase because this is a more GPU bound benchmark. I don't think we're gonna see much at all, but hey, maybe there's a surprise. Earlier I saw utilization of the GPU by 99%, so that means that the CPU was already fast enough to deliver enough data to the GPU that the change will not make any difference, but let's see. Yeah, as I expected, 8672 is within the margin of error of our previous test. So the performance hasn't changed as not at all, because we didn't change the GPU. And yeah, let's get ready for the next one. Alright guys, and now we're gonna run 3D Mark Time Spy. Alright guys, so 3D Mark, Time Spy, the score is almost identical, graphics score. Let me crunch the numbers, create a little graph for you guys so we can really look at the comparison.
So I crunched the numbers. So let's take a look at this here real quick. So we started with Cinebench R23. As we already expected, the single core score has barely changed. It has actually gone down with a 3600, just a few points, nothing major. Then the multi-core score, of course, has significantly increased from 5441 to 8305, and that's due to the fact that we doubled our threads. So we went from a 6-core 6-thread CPU to a 6-core 12-thread CPU, and that of course shows in the rendering department. Unigine Superposition, as I mentioned, it's a few years old. It is not utilizing the higher number of threads, and therefore the two scores are virtually identical. And then the last benchmark we ran as a comparison was 3D Mark Time Spy. It actually gives us 3 scores. The first is the GPU score, and as you can see, that also has barely changed. The GPU score is the same. The CPU score, on the other hand, has a quite significant uptick for the Ryzen 5 3600, as expected. So there are computer games, more modern titles, that will utilize the higher number of threads and can actually use it. But if you don't play newer stuff, or you just want to build a budget computer system and get started, the Ryzen 5 3500, especially if you combine it with what I did, use a motherboard with a B550 chipset that insists on having a Zen 2 Ryzen. There are not really many Ryzen Zen 2s that are lower spec than the 3500. There's still a 3300 and a 3100, a Ryzen 3 that you could potentially buy, but then you're also dropping down in core count. So the Ryzen 5 3500 at the time when I purchased it was $120, which is that's a good price. And then when I upgraded to the Ryzen 5 3600, it ran me about $170. So there's about a $50 price difference between those two CPUs. You make the decision if the increase in multi-core performance is enough for you to justify those extra $50. But in general, in a gaming PC, if you play older titles, just like I am, I'm not on the bleeding edge with my GPUs either. I think you're going to be just fine with the 3500. Alright guys, that will be the conclusion of this little video comparison between the Ryzen 5 3500 and the Ryzen 5 3600. Very close competitors, very close in performance as well. Only when we get into the multi-core territory, the Ryzen 5 3600 shines. So guys, if you enjoyed this little video, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next one.